evening, everyone. How are you? How are you today? It's lovely outside, and you're inside with us, so thank you. My name is Saymoukda, and I'm going to read this thing that Kimberly gave me, because I have to. I'm Saymoukda, and welcome to the Lowertown Reading Jam, sponsored by the Saint Paul Almanac. Is there a way that we could turn off the music?
Yeah, we'll work on it.
Okay. In the meantime, thank you. It's good to see all of you here, and we actually have our books available at the counter. So if you go there, you can help support us by purchasing a book. So one of the things I want to do is I want to give a shout out to the Black Dog for always being generous and always hosting us. So can we give the Black Dog a big round of applause? Awesome. So the Saint Paul Almanac is a literary organization that creates opportunities for understanding, learning, and building relationships through sharing people's stories. We'd like to thank our sponsors. This activity is made possible in part by funds provided by the Lowertown Future Fund of St. Paul Foundation and support from St. Paul Neighborhood Network. And SPN is right over there, and they air our shows throughout the month on their cable access channel. And if you go onto their website, you could actually see the schedule of all the shows that'll be broadcasted. We'd also like to thank Roberta and Ann and Ken Avador. Did I say that right? Okay, cool. Good, okay. They are artists, and they're gonna be drawing the action that's happening tonight. So, and we get to check them out after you're done, right? You're gonna be able to show everybody? Okay, cool. Okay, so tonight's show is curated by Ben Weaver. Ben's right over there. Raise your hand, Ben. Ben presents Things We Have Given Up for What and Why. And so I want to introduce Ben. Ben Weaver is a songwriter, poet, bicycle advocate, and a dad. He has released 7 CDs, 7, you guys, 7, of his original music and has published 2 poetry chapbooks. Mojo magazine called him a hillbilly Leonard Cohen, and he has had the honor of performing his music around the world. He lives in Minneapolis, where he exchanges his breath with the trees. Please help me welcome Ben Weaver.
Thanks. I think I'm just going to leave that how it is. It's great to see you all here. I'm just going to read a short little poem, and then I'm going to introduce the next reader. I was asked to bring together some people, and so I asked a couple people that I know and someone that I didn't know until last week, and now I do know. And I'm glad that everyone can get together and read a little bit. And as I go, maybe I'll talk a little about what I was thinking about the theme. But I'm going to read, this is an old poem that's unrelated. It's called Untitled. The till was open. A 56 Buick was parked out front. I think she had long legs, or else I was sitting down. There were voices and lips and, of course, desire. But after all these years, the grandfather said to the grandson, nothing connects the dots better than a 38. Accompanied by the birds' tiny little feet, which make the sound of mice in the walls, the day was just beginning. So the first person that I'm going to ask to read is Kara Olson, who is a friend of mine and a wonderful new poet who I think just graduated. Did you just graduate? From a school in North Carolina, but she can tell you about her as she wants to. And welcome, Kara, please.
Well, it's such a treat to be here and to begin sharing my poetry in public. So thanks, Ben, and it's an honor to read among such talented writers as well. So I'm going to read mostly poems. At the center, the tongue of a cow rolled out before you, nothing but pink highway for miles. This, how one drives into the animal, its ransacked plains, abandoned plots, where trains haul grain like blood. You acknowledge the creature once inside. You've seen its like fall sick before. You know not whether it swallows you, or if you engineer the clouds tunneling its nostrils. A clear liquid drips from them in wind. Does the beast gasp such? Does it croon, sing a morning song about what it houses? What of the sealed doors facing the ones who want out? All sound is growl. You avoid the big questions, their small deaths, the body's infinitude, yet you return to their lonely calls, their wild finish. Pheasant. It's hard to tell how he is not a small acre himself. His tuxedo collar is the snow's branding, the red patch around his eyes, the land's blood spill, reincarnated, and the indigo shimmering into burnt orange down his chest, the sun's death. He blends in among burrs and wheat and stands out in the blue-backed air, where flakes continue to drift down the way flour is gently sifted over a rolling board. I watch my breath form when my father aims his gun. The bird spirals out of frost-thick air and tears down the colors of fall. When we eat his meat, we eat the November sky. So I grew up in South Dakota, in central South Dakota near Pierre, the capital. And on the Missouri River, there's a patch of land called Farm Island, and this poem is titled Farm Island. I hiked the sandy trails along the river. I hiked the frozen paths along the banks. I hiked the logged footprints along the shore. And while it was in evidence, the color of the sweet William, the wild blue phlox, had tested the dime a dozen wheat grasses and thick-bladed tufts. Every year, it changed the island as a whole, and every year, estranged long enough from that native bloom, I forget the perennial was ever there. The memory of its stems pressing in a book for my mother, the winter in which she appeared unusual. So I drank a bubbly water, which is probably not a good idea before you read poetry. Try not to burp while I read. This next one is kind of a long one, so bear with me. It's titled The Nature of It. October. How soon her set becomes the blues. When I left my home this morning, you know, I didn't even cry. My love's head dips to the right when she elongates the I into an E in cry. Stage lights bend yellow into orange. Puffs of smoke envelop her frame. The shape of a woman in song. Redemption, delicate wail, all settling in among them. At the market, our hands ran along the figs, slowly seduced by their delicacy. We were lit, too, from being plucked. How fruit tastes in another country. It was like that. I fed her by finger. We tried to read German in the city paper. Inked fingers pinched a bit of tobacco and licked it. Sun shifted in the courtyard, found us in that bed, inch by inch. The long flight, our first trip outside the country, made her not believe a thing about the whipped sky, or mileage, or oceans running below, shapes unseen. Our eyes turned inward to imagine the ground covered from Minneapolis to Kiel. She says she is full of nerves. I kiss her cheek, put a slice of fig in her mouth, say, eat. From backstage I flutter, like the green flesh of the courtyard chestnut leaves burned gold by frost. She turns bold on the crowd. Her song opens up the faces of not just the front row, but the mass of them, like a wave riding out, so that the nature of their public arrival, their nakedness matching hers, pulls me toward my own kind of shore, the land upon which I stood 3 weeks before, where from the backyard I watched the sun break its yoke over the South Dakota horizon, while my grandpa and grandma picked grapes to juice. I felt the heat a young person feels when the span of years between herself and an elder operates on the soul, time reeling backwards into the future, not unlike the farm grapes, chalky and round in my grandma's hands in the sink, a common kind of washing as they rolled like small earths through the dough of her palm. I knew from whence I came. This, how waves come on, indescribable forms. My grandfather looked out the window, sighted the neighbor women, the two of them the way my mother described, middle-aged, come back to Kaler, South Dakota, to live in an old house, one of their mother's homes, so they could raise chickens on a range so open, not even the finger of God might bother them. I've seen the doubt that strikes when a face in the audience realizes they too are being seen, turned over, vulnerable as prey to an expression that hungers. I've seen a face lose its coordinates the more my love settles into herself. It undoes me too, the scope of my life mirrored back in her falsetto swell, the animal hair dormant under my jeans, along my legs, flaring as she ends her set, leaving us like coals aglow in the wind. What of the burning of the seed, the eventual disintegration of child and parent's parent? Even if chosen, what of its loss over the years that pushes a woman out until she is lost in the proximity of stranger and kin? A certain kind of horror in its freshness, a thought not thought before upon that land. I want to watch that kind of song open the tomb of a people, cut off from animal desire by a kind of seriousness I know from whence I came. I want to know what song my grandmother sang under her breath when my grandpa befriended these new neighbors, before he looked out the window and asked, "Is one of them a man?" I want to know if what rises up, if not laughter, is a kind of permission for my grandmother and her slow way of seeing into another, at least her slow way of seeing into me. The nature of it, coming to an end of our trip after the show, a new friend, Bernd, cooks for us at his home, tells us about the war, how his mother relocated to Poland to teach while he lived with his grandparents outside Berlin. A 7-year-old then, 76 years now, still doesn't waste a crumb of bread. I didn't think twice about my fast looking into his past, or how I came to think about Nils, a friend our age, who is now like a brother, who walked us through the park in Kiel where robust geese with orange feet were unlike anything I had seen before, my mind trying to fit the Canadian ones from home onto what I saw. While Nils spoke of his grandfather's silence and talked about the land we walked upon, what it held. So loud, he said, was this billowing out of 2 generations, it could not be heard. The breath of the sea, reckoned with days before we left on a ship, my love and I became sick with the swing of it, with the thought of men spying on strangers years back on submarines. How the distance from which I look says everything about the shame I felt rifling my guts as we walked past the torpedo on display, before Bernd met us at the memorial beyond the Kieler Fjord, where the sands of the Baltic were refined by time, like prairie dust. Those waves running through us, below us, as we caught sight of a jellyfish next to the dock, inflamed pink and exposed. So I'll just do a few more for y'all. wintering. Several weeks ago, I'd found foam budding from within the neglected cabbage. The earth was wet and smelled of pennies. Mice scrambled in the compost bin under shattered pumpkin. Termites and chiggers, all matter barely visible, scurried into further darkness. Thoughtlessly, I foraged tangled arugula vines for more puffed white, scraped clean its cream with my glove, and dug out the saggy heads before tossing them on top of the pile. I could speak of finding a cloud where no cloud had been seen before, of having discovered the cousin of a homeless man's breath fastened to a plant in November, but I won't, because rot is rot, and no one fancy of mind will separate sky from ground. Okay, I'll leave you with it's a poem, an ekphrastic poem written after a painting by Oscar Howe. And it's named after the title of the painting, Trial by Riding a Wild Horse. The horse had felt the man out, or the man had felt the horse out. I'm uncertain which, but the tense flesh-on-flesh ride is now over. Somewhere along the way, the horse had tapped into instinct, a mode that would have him buck, arch his back, dislodge the man, his grip. The scene's a tear swallowed by an eye, where flecks of blue, coral, and beige amass. The chin of the man kisses the horse's neck. The man remains aloft. His hands are clenched onto its mane, elbows bowed, pushed and pulled, as if the magnetic yank between man and beast inevitably involved the urge to bolt. Both of them dilate on edge. Thanks.
Thanks, Kara. So before I introduce the next reader, I'm going to tell you a little quick story. I was hosting, or I wasn't hosting anything, but I was reading at the James Day Hill Library this winter for the Real Radio Hour, and I was the monthly poet. And I would ride my bicycle down there, which is what I do all the time, is ride my bike. And I was riding home at like 11 o'clock after one of the last ones that I did, and I was at the intersection of Snelling and Selby, I think. And it was like 11 o'clock at night. It was when there were all of those eclipses, I think, that happened a month or so ago. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? And so I was looking up at the stars to try to see what I could see. It wasn't late enough for the eclipse, and I had this thought about how they should make a law that all the street lights get shut off on nights like that, and then people should go outside to be able to see these things. And so I'm sitting at this stoplight. It's a red light, and usually I would do what's called an Idaho stop, which is you just sort of stop and look and no one's there, and then you just ride through, and especially when it's late at night. But I didn't do that because I was looking up, thinking these thoughts, and there's nobody around, and all of a sudden this horn just, blares at me. And there's a guy behind me, but it's really a red light, so no one needs to go anywhere. And eventually the light turned green, and I went, and he drove up around me on the curb and yelled a bunch of obscenities at me. And so I thought, as I was riding the rest of the way home, what have we given, like this whole idea of what the hell have we given up for what and for why? Anyway, that's how I got here. So, this is the first time I've ever emceed anything. Usually I have a guitar and something to hide behind that makes me a lot more comfortable, so it's a learning experience, but I'm glad to be here. So I'd like to introduce Brad Zellar. He's going to read to you next.
Hello, I need a prop. Are you courtroom artists? Are you drawing us? Jeez, I'm intimidated. Try not to make me look like Phil Spector. Well, before I read the things that I brought here to read, this theme really resonated with me. I grew up in a small town. I was a Victor the Wild Boy, a nature boy. This is a photo of me. You probably can't see it in high school, but this is me at 18. I built this log cabin on the Cedar River outside of my hometown, and at this point, I thought this was going to be my life. When I went to see my guidance counselor before my senior year, and he asked me my goals, he reminded me of this last summer. I told him that my goals were to hitchhike across the country, ride trains across Canada, work for the National Park Service, and hike the Appalachian Trail. And by the time I was 21, 22, by the time most of my friends were graduating from college, I'd done those things. And I was like, I still feel like I'd given up everything. Everything I thought I was going to be at that boy, I surrendered. I let the world put a saddle on me. And I've been thinking about lately why. How did I end up here in this city? My dad would always say he believe that I could live in this city, that I would ever be one of his kids, that I of all of his kids would live in a big city. And I don't really have an answer to it, except that I was thinking about it, and I honest to God believe that this is true, is that those small places that I was attracted to, none of them had any bookstores or record stores. So that was the prime motivation for moving to Minneapolis. If I could have just hung on for a little bit longer until the internet, I probably would still be out there in the woods. Anyway, these are three linked pieces that sort of harken back to the days when I was that boy in that small, sleepy place. June. One year when I was young, there was for a very brief time a girl who lived alone with her mother in a trailer at the edge of town. They were recent arrivals. The girl was a loner at school and held herself close, a new kid trying to be hard enough to survive. She had started attending classes after the Christmas break, and it was a terrible age to get thrown into the middle of a small town school. One night I was walking out along the railroad tracks, as I often did after my family had eaten dinner and everyone else was settling in to stare at the television. It was early summer. School had just gotten out. As I was kicking rocks down the tracks, I encountered this girl along the creek at the edge of a field of prairie grasses that were just starting to green. She was catching fireflies and grasshoppers. I watched her for a time from the railroad trestle, fascinated by her stillness, and then by the grace with which she would suddenly pounce. I walked down the bank below the trestle and approached her in the gloaming. If she was at all startled to see me there, she never let on. We had never so much as exchanged a word in school, yet she glanced briefly at me and then turned away and pounced once again into the grass. When she came back up, she looked me right in the eyes and said, "Do you remember your first memory?" I thought this was an interesting question. I was 14 years old and it had never occurred to me before. "I think I was teething," I said. "I just remember being miserable and rubbing my gums with my knuckles, and my mom put something on my gums with a Q-tip and it felt so good and I slept." "Wow," she said, "that seems like a really early memory. How old were you?" I shrugged. "It doesn't seem that long ago, really." "I guess not," she said, and then held up her mason jar, clutched in both hands, right to my face. "These," she said, "this is what I remember. Sitting at my bedroom window at night and listening to the strange sounds in the fields and seeing the fireflies floating in the darkness. I thought it was a dream." She studied the jar and then smiled. "Maybe it was a dream. Maybe it is. But I love this dream." I asked her what she was going to do with her jar. "I can show you," she said, "but I won't show you unless you tell me your full name and promise not to be a creep about anything." I told her my name and said I would try not to be a creep about anything. "I guess that's good enough," she said. "If it's weird, though, that's your problem." We walked along the creek together back toward the lights of town. The yard light outside her trailer was the first light in the distance. It was a double-wide trailer, and one of those trailers that had fake shutters and siding and was trying so hard to look like a real house. There were also flower boxes. I remember that. There was no car in the driveway, and I asked where her mother was. "She works the night shift at Tyson's," she said. "Chickens are wrecking her hands." The girl led me into the dark trailer and down a short, narrow hallway to her bedroom. I'm not going to try anything, she said, but we can't have any lights. I stood at the doorway of her bedroom until I felt her hand gently push me between my shoulders and heard her voice behind me. Go on in. I'm not going to kill you. I went in and shut the door. She told me to sit on the bed. Light from outside crept in through the curtains on the window. The curtains had an embroidered heart in the middle, at the part, and inside the heart, a girl and a boy were facing each other and bowing at the waist awkwardly, leaning their heads in for a kiss. The girl noticed me studying the curtains, laughed, and glided over to the window. Loves me, she said, and then pulled the curtains apart. Just like that, the girl and the boy were separated, the heart divided, the kiss interrupted. Loves me not. My mom found these at a garage sale and thought they were funny. She turned away from the window and crouched next to a dollhouse in the corner. My grandfather made this dollhouse for me for Christmas one year, she said, but I've never put any dolls in there. It would just seem too sad. They would be trapped, and I'd feel stupid trying to pretend they were alive. I watched as she lowered the jar through the open side of the dollhouse roof. She removed the lid and shook the contents loose, and then, in one lunging motion, sat down next to me on the bed, the empty jar cradled in her hands. Just wait, she said, and be very quiet. Nothing seemed to happen for several moments, but then I saw the first firefly flicker in the living room of the dollhouse, and then another, and another in an upstairs bedroom. Pretty soon, they started to float lazily out the windows and up through the roof and into the air around us, spark after spark flaring in the dark bedroom of the girl whose name I still did not know. And then slowly, the grasshoppers, or whatever they were, started up their washboard chorus. I looked at the girl. She was bent over, the jar gripped now between her knees. Her eyes were darting around and watching the fireflies, and she had a look of pure rapture on her face. It was almost like I wasn't there. This world tends to traffic in complications and improbabilities both wondrous and cruel. But even now, when I wonder about the woman that girl became and remember the girl that woman once was, I feel like I am once again 14 years old and breathless and trapped in one magical moment of a past that seemed to promise nothing but enchantment and dreams. Thanks. July. Bloom of fireworks above a black field, the idol of insects throbbing from the damp ditches, distant petroleum carnival of light, dark steeples, and a water tower announcing the presence of a town. Is that the rattle of a snare drum from somewhere out in the fields? Tell me again what lives in that place beyond this darkness. The bonfire will signify what again? When it all goes up in flames, what is it we're going to be burning? I like this song. It reminds me of something. I can't put my finger on it, but it involved, I'm sure, a night just like this. We were in a car, going somewhere else, or perhaps just somewhere. Somewhere else, I guess, came later. But then there was only this. Remember, when there was only this, it was never enough. Perhaps that was a problem. You can't put your finger on it. I love that about you, how you can never seem to put your finger on it, and how badly you would like to put your finger on it. Things in general, the way they don't seem quite real to you, within reach, graspable, the way you're always saying, hold out hope, as if it could mean the many things it could mean. Not just a clinging to, not just something desperate, but an offering, something extended, something shared. I love these quiet roads just outside what is our life. That feeling of being lost in a still unfamiliar place, of being plunked down on another planet, looking out with dim longing and dimming wonder at the distant glow of that puzzle that will never be home. Can't say. That's another one of yours that I love. As if you mean it, as if there's some mysterious prescription, as if you honestly cannot say, cannot utter whatever words might explain, whatever words might possibly make a difference or bring back all the things we've surrendered, sacrificed, abandoned, and lost. Because, and this I choose to think and believe, those words are still forming in you, still turning over and lining up in your head, still drilling and taking shape and preparing for the long march up into the light when they will finally become magically truth. The truth we're going to need to turn finally and forever away from that dark, still mysterious planet barely rising across the black, empty fields. Thank you. August. Long, long ago, In the sweltering twilight of an August night, roaring with cicadas and the vacuum hum of a lazy small town in retreat from the heat and the falling darkness, the yards and sidewalks abandoned for living rooms and television sets, the wobbling blue screens of which we could see through the dark, otherwise blank window frames and the gauzy, fluttering filter of curtains, I bucked you across town through the empty streets on my Stingray bike. We were hunched together on my sparkling blue banana seat. I was pedaling furiously, and you were clinging to the sissy bar. I wish you had been clinging to me, wished you would put your arms around my chest. But it was nice to feel you there behind me all the same, nice to hear your laughter, all the wonderful variations of your wonderful laugh, ringing out over the silent neighborhoods, and your voice at my ear and your breath in my hair. I don't know, can't remember where we were going. We weren't there going to the Dairy Queen, where everyone else went, and where the moths were in full swirling frenzy around the street lamps in the parking lot. We were headed, I'm sure, elsewhere. We had darkness in mind, I think, the place where the futile overlight of that shitty little town gave way suddenly to a great stretch of emptiness, where the pavement turned to gravel, where there were fields rolling away into the distance, and where there was a muddy creek, and there were railroad tracks and trains crawling off into the night, out into an America we could only then imagine. Those trains, you always said, sounded like iron waterfalls, like something heavy being carried away. But we did imagine together, breathlessly, with ridiculous hope and optimism. That place beyond was where we knew we would eventually have to go to make our escape, to complete the process of becoming, to find ourselves even as we lost each other. That was also the place beyond our close little world whose secrets and sadnesses we felt certain we had already divined, where we would one day, through exactly the sort of occasional miracle this world is still capable of delivering, find each other again. I am still, every day, my sister, my old friend, stunned by this miracle, still gratefully puzzled by my bounty of blessings entirely undeserved. And now, it always seems to be that same magic dusk I remember, and I find myself once again in the position of trying to talk you onto the back of my Stingray bike, trying to convince you to ride with me out beyond the false, feeble light of that low town, away from and out from under the people we have allowed ourselves to become, trying to get you to slow down and to listen again to the roaring silence and the moving water and the winding racket of insects throbbing from the ditches, and to lie on your back with me marveling at the stars and the heat lightning trembling down the dark sky across the fields. Thank you. It's my briefcase.
Thanks, Brad. So the next person that I was going to read, I met last week at another reading where I didn't have my guitar, but I did okay because it was dark. I'd like to introduce Heid Erdrich next.
Thank you, Ben. It was really fun to hear Ben last week. I didn't know about the guitar, so it was exciting. He did read poems about bike, so the bike was there. But I have to say that I'm going to read the same two of the ones that I read last week, because they fit, so. And thank you to the artists in exchange for having colors on. I hope you'll be flattering. When I was thinking about the theme, of what we've given up, I looked through this book, which has poems from 4 different books of mine in it, and I didn't have a lot of poems about loss. And I thought, what kind of poet am I? That I don't have a lot of poems about loss. There's a lot of poems about reunion, about recovering things, about asking for things back. There's an awful lot of those. So But I did think of a couple of that are about what we've left somewhere. And this was one of the first poems I wrote about how we make progress on the planet, and then we go beyond the planet and make what we think is progress, and then we leave junk there. And this is from 1988. I started this poem when I read the title in the Johns Hopkins Gazette, "Space Junk, a Danger to Launches." It was about how they were worried that we couldn't send space shuttles up because there were too many objects from other missions in space flying about up there. And there was a little quote that said, "The typical object up there is about the size of a filing cabinet." About the same time, they were promising people that they could have their remains shot into space. And we had a loss of a family member, and the things all combined in my head in an imaginary landscape called future debris. Until he died, we thought our neighbor dull. Now he's a distant point of light. His cremated body orbits low in its reflectorized canister, creating what the space burial firm called a twinkling reminder of the loved one. There's a wheel chart to map his course. Nights we go around back of the house, gaze at what little true sky winks through the haze of debris. It amazes me and is a relief, really, not to have the whole universe smack up against me like a wall. All my life I've strained to comprehend planets and motion, the unending. That's been clouded, obscured by the detritus humans seem to produce naturally. Ink to the squid, protective cloak through which we cannot see and therefore think we are not seen. Some night, a little girl who will know only tame animals, city trees, will listen to my tales of wilderness and game. I'll hold her up so she basks in the light and the glint of celestial jetsam. She will spread her hands, reach for the bright flecks, ask if they are wild. Lying to the child, I'll say they are. And the filing cabinets, they'll glimmer like stars. So that was 1988, where in my hometown in North Dakota, you could still see this fabulous sky before the lights all changed, and it's hard to see it at night anymore. Constantine Cavafy, the poet, wrote a poem called "Waiting for the Barbarians." Some of you remember that. And there was a quote in that line that kept going through my head during the beginning of the Second Gulf War. And he wrote, "And now what shall become of us without any barbarians? Those people were some kind of solution." So this is called post-barbarian. Such things as dazzled me, emerald brilliance, glitter of costly canes, wonderfully carved with silver and gold, mean nothing now that I've left the gates. Left off my threats and treating, ceased my distant drums and leaping out at civil folk in dark barrens, where my young sleep piled like squirrels or dogs or any creature you choose to call us. Now what? Now who? You draw a zone that attracts, holds terror in its grasp, sticks flies in a paper trap. Those bodies glitter too, void, wrapped with yours, litter the sand with metal husks and insect noise. We see it on your televised maps and understand. Fear of them keeps the vote in hand, solves all economic woes, turns the key to homelessness, best guesses global warming, antidotes, AIDS, fixes inside fights, unravels the mystery of misogamy, tells the world it's them, not me. So we know what has become of you who needed us, your kind of solution. But what was it we once solved? What was the quandary? Who asked the question? So that was the loss of the barbarians. And then I'm going to do two new poems. And they are much more about particular loss, environmental loss, and the one that concerns everybody about pollinators and virginity. If you have a teenager like I do, it's a couple of them. The honeysuckers. We drank the nectar left there for you. We grew drunk on doom. There was never enough. Down by the river of our youth, we pulled love with our tongues. We took something from you. Green, groping in reeds and stink, river, slow in its drive-by, saw us, said nothing. We could say we were young. Young was once true. We took all that was sweet and all that would be. We left no excuse. We ignored the body-made call, the sweet text, its subtle alien speech. We beseeched, did you not get our message? It tasted of many grasses drunk, clover buds, sepal petals, then panic, then wrath, then the end. All that we read, we misread. Come hither, help us. Come, come, did you not get enough? Taste in the grasses, be drunk. Taste many times over, taste more. Taste in a hurry, in passion. Taste to the end of all tongues, and be done. That was the honeysuckers, and this one is called Red Star, and it's about cottonwoods. Where I grew up in North Dakota and further out, I was always attracted to and astounded by the incredibly huge cottonwoods that you also have along the rivers here and in other places. And I was told at some point when I was very young that on the prairies, people used to bury bodies in the cottonwoods because, it's frozen a lot of the year. Where else are you going to bury people? And there was a sort of easy way to scaffold bodies long ago. So there were sort of sacred places, and I always liked the idea of burial in the sky. So these trees are really important to me, particularly. In October, I read this in the Bismarck Tribune online. The comment sections on the Bismarck Tribune online are really worth reading. Inside cottonwood twigs is the shape of a star, a sign of life and natural harmony for American Indians and others. Cottonwood forests along the Missouri River are in decline. That's way worse than decline, you'll hear. Red star. Inside the red star of a cottonwood twig, inside the box of a North Dakota map, that is my country as it was. 200-year-old towers, trees as old as our sorrow, their silver leaves platter for no one now. 200-year-old trees lost their way to breed, their old gray branches no longer strong enough to hold our dead. Sweet embrace of eternal sleep, lovers' arms always, always, always. Now, no more. No longer strong enough to hold our ancestors in their sleep, silver leaves platter for no one now. Inside the red star of a cottonwood heart, inside the box of a North Dakota map, 60 years these dams kept those trees raining clouds of seed on barren silt. There will be no more great cottonwoods. There is nowhere left to go to die but the boxy map of my country in the red star of my deep inside. Thank you.
Thanks. Heid also has a really quite a great cookbook, which is how I mostly came familiar with her work. So I gave up a car a while ago, and part of the reason I did that is so that I just don't like cars. But I'm going to read this thing really quick here. It's called Things Frank Said to Me on the Bike This Week, and it was an accident, really, and Frank is my 8-year-old son who I ride 10 miles to school one way and pick him up and go 10 miles back, and we rode all winter long on this special little bike that I have that I could carry him on. And I just started cataloging all of these things that he would say to me, and I realized right now that really the reason that I don't drive is because now I ride the bike with him everywhere, and we have these incredible conversations that go on and on and on that we wouldn't have in the car. Dad, what came first, the Mercedes sign or the peace sign? While passing under a tree full of singing birds, Dad, you know we are listening to dinosaurs right now. Why is there only one person in every car? Would you rather step in a freezing cold river or step in dog poop? Finish your story, then let's get back to talking about DNA. Don't you think we always have the best conversations just before the ride is over? This is called Wooden Axle and the Wasteland of Trains. Jeffy at the spigot, those eyes like wind through bullet holes, or a sink full of dirty pans. Motorcycle clouds, jackstrawed telephone poles. We went to see the beekeeper, a rope hanging from an oak, leaves on the kitchen floor, her breasts like snow falling through a torn screen. Root poems, crow-footing out her arm, is how the world ends. Sister coming home through the corn, old workbench face and his midnight thieves building the railroads a wasteland. Out of pine shadows, the regather begins to congeal. Whispering totems make fire from scattered orange peels and boxcars clanking up the moon. Jeffy up near the engine, singing Nobody Knows the Trouble. Shoveling hallelujah from the avalanches. Smoke and laughter rise and once more go between stars. And so little sister protects the wandering needlework of the Forsythia and the Despopablos. Puts blue on the rivers and streams, weighted with stones into her many ferny loops. Those who know what the forests had in mind before Wooden Axle rolled up are standing in the doorways, refusing old workbench face and his conqueror's entry. This time the stories will be told by the rare touchwood and quiet mossery. Jeffy at the 6-burner, little sister rolling out the dough, because generosity is how you prepare for a rainy day. This is called Dog Names. Lucky, long-nailed, burnt sunlight, beach stones, rabbit chaser. Maggie, buried behind a motel across US 61 from Lake Superior, one blue eye, one brown. Sally, chanterelles, sugar beets, tobacco barn, reservoir, star sleeper. Morris, unfiltered, sun diamond, smell of grandmother and cherries. Ronan, white wing, samurai. Nico, black boy, wave biter, shadow herder. Elliot, box of cowbirds and mended despair. Mose, broken right ear that never stood back up, 8 chickens, loved Maggie. Edsel, soulmate in dog form, first one up, last one down, spotted tongue. So this is something that I wrote to read tonight. I've got a really good friend of mine who has, his grandfather was named Tony Romano. And so every time I'm talking to my friend Ben, he says, well, Tony Romano's done everything there is to do in the world, and he lived up in Pine City. And Tony Romano was a dentist, but he fashioned himself an archaeologist, and so I imagined that I was Tony Romano's grandson, and I wrote this poem called Tony Romano. Out in my fields it is raining. There is a buffalo and a girl. her hair like muddy parsnips. She is walking toward the buffalo with something between her teeth. I can't tell what it is. The grass is bent down from the wind like fishing poles. Tony Romano said work should be our life should be our work. That way we can spend our time living instead of working. Fish Crow said there is no difference between flying and roosting, between eating and singing. Tony Romano was a flint knapper, archaeologist, cook, and a terrible painter. He knew a spot near Pine City where Joseph Nicollet chiseled points north into a giant boulder on the banks of the Kettle River. Now that Tony Romano is gone, so is that spot. Tony Romano's critique of us as a population went something like this. We are discontent and disconnected because since the day we gave up living, we have had nothing left to do but work. And our will to work is perpetuated by a false sense of security that takes its roots in an unquenchable desire for convenience. He would go on, elaborating that the danger of convenience we so hungrily seek is the reliance it has on a specific set of circumstances, and that only when those circumstances are in place can the conveniences we claw after exist. He would call out the trick, announce our demise and capture within the trap, stating that to have the comfort of an air-conditioned house or to drive a car, one needs the road, the gas, the money. In the end, all the circumstances which enable the car, the road, the gas, and the money lead backwards down a long line of circumstances, all of which bear little resemblance to convenience. Tony Romano would say, convenience has assaulted our curiosity and critical thinking. It has replaced our tongues, our minds, and hearts. He would say all a job does is make someone else rich, while we become divided from our families and taken out of our homes, left with no time for the very convenience we have toiled after. Tony Romano would say, walk in the woods instead. When I miss Tony Romano, people call me a rememberist. When Tony Romano was alive, he called me grandson. Fish Crow is perched up on the roof of the machine shed, his shadow falling asleep in the trees around like bones in a sweater. Out in my field, the buffalo and the girl with muddy parsnip hair have finally reached each other. From where I'm standing in the dark, I cannot differentiate between the two. I see a buffalo with a woman's head, and whatever was in her mouth is gone. I hear the buffalo say to the girl, there is suffering and struggle, and then there is suffering and struggle to avoid suffering and struggle. Which would you rather? Stars are beating up around the edges of the night like a pot about to boil over. The girl whispers back, like a birch, like a trout, or marginalia. If you need water, don't dam the rivers. Learn how to make it rain. Okay, I have this one other piece that I'm going to read, which is I've been working on this really long poem that sounds really dramatic, but it's just basically I don't know where to stop. And it's called Ragged Ass Joy is the poem, and I've been reading this as kind of an excerpt from that. So I'm going to read that. Thank you for being here and listening. Usually I don't do poetry readings. I don't know what I'm talking about, actually. I've been doing a lot of poetry readings lately, so I don't know why there's always this inkling to just be self-effacing, but thanks to Saint Paul Almanac for having us in the Lowertown Reading Jams series, and Kimberly and Heid and Kara and Brad. A really good friend of mine just did this amazing dance piece, and part of her story, Emily Johnson is her name. I don't know if anybody saw this piece, but she is this unbelievable choreographer, and I was in the dance, and part of it was outside on the lawn at Northrop. And then she gets up on this podium and she just tells this amazing story, and she's kind of making it up as she goes, and she's kind of not. And then she says, I think our future could be full of joy if we want it to be. So I think she's right. The farmer's horses wait at the end of the road, nudging the gate. When the snow melts, the little river gets bigger and rises from a dull hum to a low roar. The dark pines still, the river's wild. No two trees and no two seeds, the shovel-marked moon. Great-grandmother knows which berries are for eating and remembers what it used to look like before the roads were paved. We can't destroy the earth, only our ability to live with it. Raccoon becomes thunderbird, thunderbird becomes raccoon. Afternoon light steeps the frozen bluff, cut up by bare branches, goldening acorns and eagle shadows. Fox fur snatched by a thorn, orange juice spilt into balsamic. A young man and a young woman caring for an old tree, picking out the splinters, connecting the inevitables. Neck deep in the brambles, wild-haired and washboard road. We were once a people of blacksmiths, archers, trackers, growers, sowers, husbands and wives to the animals, trees, storms, rivers, bees, wildflowers, winds, subsisters, walkers, seed savers, preservers, storytellers. Sweat, chaff, fat, bones, salt, thyme, mud, fur, worms, milk. The air best smell of our work, not our waste. Freedom is in the dandelions, though we have come to believe that weeds are for the killing. It is mediocrity that is invasive. Wildflowers talk, concrete does not. Food should taste of the last storm, the deer or fox that brush past before sunrise, salt and rosemary that come up through the window on the wind. Goodness can only accumulate so fast in a thing. Invite tension, allow the time it takes for the manifestations to occur. With the growing of our food and the rearing of our children, we must carefully tend to that which will survive us. If there is a corrective action, it is to always ride a bike, breathe more fresh air, use your hands to make things, go wandering, then come home and tell about it. I want dirt in my salad greens, on my potatoes, carrots, and beets. Want there to be seeds mixed in with my harvest. Want there to be wet stems stuck to the sides of my sink, rain in my windowsills, and moths in my bathroom light fixtures. I want ants to carry away my crumbs from under the kitchen counters and table, the leaves to collect on my steps and change places in the wind. I'll walk with the dog in the mornings because I want to go where a dog wants to go, until I split like a melon of my own ripeness. Thank you.